Hi, my name is Chris Van Dyke, VFX supervisor and former head of studio at Crafty Apes. And I'm here to moderate a panel called The Future of VFX, Is There Magic Up Ahead or Are There Monsters Lurking Around the Corner? And yeah, I'm really excited to talk about, I guess, a breadth of topics that all relate, talking about the rising demand for content, virtual production, working from home, and how they all relate to each other. And I'd like to just take a minute to introduce each person on the panel before we get started. To my left, we have Paul Becker, former head of business development at DNEG. And we have Cindy Koo, who is the VP of strategy and global production at Scanline. And we have Catherine Brillhart, who is a freelance virtual production supervisor. So I guess, Paul, if you could start first and just kind of let us know a little bit about your background and who you are and why you're excited to talk today.
Thanks, Chris. You know, who I am in a nutshell is somebody who watched a lot of behind the scenes videos when I was a kid and thought, oh, I could be a filmmaker when I was well out of university. And so I just bought a computer and a camera and destroyed my credit card and tried to make an independent feature film and got in all sorts of financial trouble, which kind of got me into being a VFX artist because you had to pay for your debt somehow. And from there, I kind of found out I was average at that, but I was really good at producing. And very quickly, that sort of filmmaking drive kind of got me into being an executive producer. And so I started my own stereo conversion company with 5 other smart artists and sort of recruited investors. And we, you know, very quickly elbowed our way into the business, and I suddenly found myself, you know, working on major tentpole films and had over 250 employees until my company was bought, and I was bought by DNEG and then sort of recruited into business development and sort of worked my way up to leading the business development team at DNEG. So I kind of transitioned into VFX through being an artist, then being in stereo conversion, and then sort of handling the business side of it. So I've kind of gone from reading about people and then working with those people and then eventually trading those people like, you know, pieces of a chessboard. So I've kind of been full circle in the business.
Awesome. We're really happy to have you here. Cindy, can you tell us a bit about yourself too?
Yeah, absolutely. So throughout my career in visual effects, I've always focused on production. Started from the ground up, so I'm very familiar with, you know, coordinating on the floor to producing a project, executive producing, you know, as well. So a lot of focus is on schedules, how to plan the work in a as reasonable time frame as possible. So that's always been, you know, what I've been working on. While, you know, in the last several years, the Scanline also focused a lot on business management and strategy, and, you know, led several of our expansions and new studio growth and things like that. So very much involved in what it takes to build out a new, you know, studio, equipment, building chairs, tables, did everything. So yeah. Excited to be here today to talk about what we think the future of VFX could be.
And Cindy, just for context, ballpark, you know, how many studios or locations is Scanline, and how many people roughly do you guys manage?
Yeah, so right now we have 7 physical studios, and right now our headcount is about 1,300. Of course, through COVID, we've also catapulted a lot of additional, you know, remote artists all around the world, you know, in Ontario, in Spain, Italy, France. We have a couple in Singapore. So it's a wide spectrum of crew that we have in addition to our 7 physical studios as well. So it's been really fun and interesting to be able to, you know, interact with people from all over the world and see how we can bring around together and still continue to deliver. Because that's our mantra, we keep delivering.
Yeah, that's great. Catherine, can you tell us a bit more about your story too?
Sure, absolutely. My name is Catherine. I'm a cinematographer and somebody who's also built a career in visual effects. So, you know, this range of experience from kind of working on independent projects as a cinematographer, working my way up through crew to all the way up to DPing projects, and then simultaneously, you know, coordinating and being hands-on with visual effects supervisors as they, you know, are giving notes on shots and all of those workflows on set and in post. So I've just sort of built a very well-rounded sort of intersection of my interests. And when virtual production started really becoming itself in the past 10 years, I sort of started layering that into my expertise as well through VR and shooting, like, you know, 360 worlds and all that. So like now I also am a freelance virtual production supervisor. And what's really cool is that it's sort of catapulted me into just working in independent productions and then Hollywood, you know, features and television through visual effects, into kind of being in that circle of creatives like director, DP, and visual effects soup on Hollywood features such as Black Adam. So it's kind of cool to be on such a wide range of budgets, exploring this technology with boots on the ground.
That's amazing. Awesome. Yeah, so we have a lot of really cool perspectives. And I think before we dive too much into any of the specifics of you know, virtual production or shortage of talent and working from home and how these tools all speak to each other and how they may help or hurt us. I just thought it would be good to ask, is there any other time that you've seen this much advancement or change in technology in your career before?
Oh, for me, I'd liken it to like I never ever played with film. Like film is like this avatar to me. It's like when I worked on when I worked on films that were shot on film, they were already scanned and they were digital files. But even before that, when it became obvious that you could take a video camera and plug it into your computer through Firewire, and actually like what you shot got dropped onto your computer, whether it's tape or later the cards, it was just like, to me, like a liberation, because, you know, it was very difficult. Even when VHS was those old VHS editing bays, like those were difficult to use and frustrating. So to me, it's just been like the technology has just been like ongoing instances of democratization and allowing you know, someone who in some ways has no business making a movie, which is what a lot of the guys like George Lucas and Francis Ford Coppola were predicting a long time ago. So I see this virtual production, real-time 3D, as that next step of that sort of wave.
Yeah, definitely. I can
Yeah,
relate
go ahead,
to that.
Catherine.
Like I feel like the DSLR movement, which was part of this push to bring digital filmmaking and transition like filmmaking into digital. That's kind of what feels similar to me about this future proofing of our industry by bringing real-time technology into filmmaking and digital filmmaking now as well. Because, you know, the same, like DSLRs brought cameras to people, they brought a whole like product suite and like digital sort of platform that any student could use to kind of make an entire film from end to end without iterating on film. And similarly with visual effects, now you have sort of this game engine that allows you to render in real time, and it's also free, and it gives you this whole suite of visual effects ready tools with instructions for how to use those tools to do so many different types of workflows that maybe somebody who only has a DSLR could never have made before. So it sort of outdated that movement itself.
Yeah, so we definitely highlighted like positives that help the filmmakers and creative be more approachable and accessible. You know, on that topic of magic or monsters, how would you guys define that now? How, you know, let's maybe talk about what are some of the monsters that could be around the corner for us, or alternatively, what are some of the other magic or good things that we're seeing currently with this advancement in technology?
Well, I'll go. so I sort of see two things happening. I think the magic is, again, just the fact that, you know, a kid can with a real-time engine can actually make an entire fantastical, you know, movie or experience. I think that in many cases, the way these real-time 3D technologies kind of are advertised, at one hand seems very democratic, and then on the other hand it seems like it's just a high-end thing. So I think the danger is that the young filmmakers and producers that want to get into it feel that they have to have the top level gear to do it. That's not the case. And then the other side of VFX that I think the monsters that are coming is that there's a homogenization of a look starting to happen. It used to be that you went to certain facilities because those facilities could achieve something that the others couldn't do. And now, because DCC tools, you know, digital content creation tools are all sort of off the shelf, looks are starting to become same. And I think that would be very horrific for the VFX business, that everything becomes a zombification, you know, like it's like, oh, I've seen that in that movie and I saw that in that movie. So I think that the challenge that lies before us, both in the senior categories and in the guerrilla categories, is who can create something that looks new, that feels fresh.
That's great. And yeah, does anyone else have any thoughts on what some of the other pros or cons could be before we kind of get into the specifics of what we're talking about, just on a high level?
I guess on like a high level, it's really cool because I guess the magic in this future proofing of our industry with real time means that we are like, I guess for me as somebody who's sort of seen in our industry broad strokes, like maybe directors and DPs and producers, like people that kind of try to hide the magic and not include a visual effects supervisor, let's say, even in like a promotional conversation about the work, because they're worried about how like their product or their film is going to be demystified. Like what I've seen with this progression over the years is just pulling visual effects supervisors into that tight-knit crew and having them be seen as an equal player in those relationships. And I think they are certainly in those creative discussions, but they're, you know, the industry hasn't been outspoken about how necessary visual effects supervisors are. So what's really cool is that there's this new embracing of that role and actually creating a new role, even in that trio, which is like a virtual production supervisor that's technically supporting the DP and the VFX supervisor to help with these visions earlier on in the front end of the project. So that's something that's really cool. And I would say, to piggyback on Paul a little bit about like Monster and Closet being art and design with those VFX, I think it's also like something we can do to kind of anticipate what he's describing, is making sure production designers are pulled into that real-time technology early on as well.
Yeah, and I guess to springboard off that and keep it in the vein of virtual production still, I'd love to hear more about the production side too, like, because we have all these you know, creative benefits we're talking about, but how do we actually produce that? How do we fold that into our production and our scheduling and our budgets? And maybe Cindy, I'll throw it over to you, and and how has that been affecting your planning, and what, I guess, just any general thoughts on that?
Yeah, absolutely. You know, I think overall there's definitely several, you know, adjustments that needs to be done, especially, you know, if we're talking about a VFX vendor point of view, the production schedule, and not so much on the studio side, but where a vendor gets involved is being expanded, you know, like a vendor, or on the VFX vendor side, the involvement begins a lot earlier. And in that case, there are also pros and cons in terms of, you know, being involved earlier. I think in terms of being creative, being involved, I think everyone is extremely excited to be able to be part of the creative process and being able to educate and showcase how decisions made earlier on would impact a lot down the line, which may be something that filmmakers never knew, not because they are oblivious, but they're just not really being walked, you know, didn't get the walkthrough at that point in time. The part that may not be as transparent or may not be seen as material is it does actually increase the overhead. From a VFX vendor point of view, you know, you do need to still continue the client servicing, you know, as we would, you know, call it, and have that process for a longer period of time. That does increase the, you know, additional budget, additional overhead, like I said, that a VFX vendor has to, you know, invest in. Could this investment, you know, provide the ROI at the end of the day, because we eventually are so involved that the vendor and the, you know, the virtual production supervisor and the VFX supervisor from the studio side are so in line that their creative vision are very much the same, that they can make sure that all the versions and work done internally are very much on the same page. Perhaps I definitely see that as a benefit if we are able to continue maintaining that alignment and do not still, you know, go in different directions.
Yeah, and like, let's be clear to what you know, to what Cindy's talking about. My experience is that the studios, they think this is all about saving money, and it's actually costs more money. You know, like the idea, and the legacy VFX vendors are the ones that are going to really suffer because they have such long established pipelines that they're tacking virtual production onto the end or maybe at the front, depending on how their pipelines work. And that is not, that's not the point, you know, and then studio executives have such a legacy idea of what a film budget is. They think a film budget is like, you know, like, oh, okay, well, we put a little money into previs and then we go shoot, and then the bulk of the money goes on turnover, and then we have, you know, change orders at the end when everyone changes their mind that, you know, Superman's supposed to be green instead of blue. But like virtual production, the promise is that, you know, what Catherine was talking about is that the production designer is actually building something that the the visual effects vendor should be getting before they go to camera. And quite often the studios balk at that because now their budget, they're throwing a bunch of money before the film gets shot. And so there have been some major productions that have been basically bombed because nobody could get their head around that. The vendors were not ready because of times, you know, like, oh, we're going to shoot in 5 months. And it's like, it takes a year to do visual effects the traditional way. How is it that we're going to get all the assets done in 5 months with you signing off, by the way? You know, and there's also been some, you know, and I won't say the production's names because of NDAs and everything else, but there's been some major films that are in theaters right now where the director was sold the idea that you'll just get the camera, the VFX will be done in camera and you're all done. It's like shooting for real. And then that director gets into post and decides he doesn't like the way it looks. And so then the costs actually balloon. Yeah. So, and the vendors get blamed for it, you know, and it's not the vendor, it's not really the vendor's fault. It's the way that the paradigm has been sold. So I think that we have to be really cognizant of the fact that this great new technology that I think is very amazing for young filmmakers and independents that are smart enough to get into the tools and build their vision out where they don't have very much money. They can't go shoot a space opera, but they can do it in the engine. It doesn't actually translate to the $80 million, $120 million budgets. They're not ready for it actually. And so I think that there's sort of ups and downs, and the ones that really end up paying for it are the vendors generally, because the vendors have to keep going. That's how they survive. So it's very tricky for especially the bigger legacy vendors.
Yeah, I mean, to kind of even to piggyback on what Paul was saying, I think like contextually over the past 2 years, especially with COVID, something that changed how everyone was talking about these things. I think there were a lot of sales and marketing around it to kind of jumpstart, you know, the integration of this technology into filmmaking. And I do agree with what he's saying about really thinking, you have to do different, you have to think different about filmmaking, and that's what it requires in this process. Whether you're doing something that's as controlled of an animation pipeline as Jon Favreau with Mandalorian, or if you're a director who is working with a DP who's like, I'm a shooter, you know, and I want to build an environment and have this kind of a different kind of experience, you can scale what you're doing even on these larger budget projects. But my advice would be to bring on a neutral person, like a production side virtual production supervisor, and a team that they can help assemble to make sure that you have that, like Paul was saying, almost a year in advance or more, depending on the scope of what you're trying to do. Build a stage, use a pre-built stage, whatever, to simplify that process. But I just want to say that it is possible on these bigger budget projects to bring this technology in a meaningful way. You just have to work together around the creative and how the creatives want to work to make it work for them. It's this kind of technology is like in an infantile state a little bit. And it's something that can succeed. It's just, you need to set it up in a nurturing sort of way. You know, like you wouldn't want to have an infant and like leave them to fend for themselves. You have to really put the right people around that technology to make it move forward. So I don't want it to be totally discouraging, but what's cool is that it's scalable. And it's like right now, this is the year that's really exciting, because as a student, you have access to these things. As a professional that's starting a business, you can access a lot of vendors that are working together that can support you to build this business around, you know, looking at a piece of virtual production, whether it's motion capture or, you know, like just other specific parts of it. Like there's some things that are very democratized, and then on the bleeding edge, it's just still pretty huge.
Yeah, and absolutely. I think like, make no bones about it, the big budget films can use virtual production for a quarter of their shoot, and they'll do very well. But it's not like we're not going to just move how we do a movie into an LED volume, because I mean, that's not even virtual production, really. That's just one form of it. But the big budget films can afford to use it where it's necessary. I think the low budget films can also use it in, you know, to Chris's point about COVID, if you can't fly your talent to locations, there is a world where, okay, I'm going to shoot all my close-ups, all my mediums in a virtual production stage in LA or something like that. And I'm going to shoot all my wides in Vancouver because I need the rebate, you know, and so I'll do some virtual production, we'll do some traditional VFX, you know, and mix it. But you got to be really like, you got to be like Cindy, not me. Like Cindy is a production manager that knows how to do things. You know, every young producer that I've trained, they ask how to be me, and I say, don't do what I do. Do everything I don't do. Be a good producer. You got to be a good manager. You got to understand budgets. So I think that this tool is in its infancy, and it will bring new ways of doing things in the right hands. It's going to be abused too.
It may not be the right question then, but I was going to ask what type of projects benefit the most. You've both touched on it, but is there a case study or a slice that you could say, you know, you're happy to put comments to, like maybe around schedule, maybe around how robust the vision was up front, or are there any scenarios where you're like, this was the right workflow, this is the right scenario that could be replicated? Yeah, any thoughts on that?
I mean, a short answer would, like a short thing would be like, vehicle work is something that over time has been proven to be really great. You know, like helicopter work, train work, car process shots. You know, it's an interesting tool to use if you are a creative team that doesn't want to do night shoots? Like, what if you started, like, usually you have to plan night shoots in a very specific way in the schedule, because if you start hot with night shoots in the beginning of your schedule, then you're working with people who get tired and it stresses people out. So it kind of, depending on how you use this technology, it can open up opportunities in your schedule for specific things. Or like one shot that I recreated just through borrowing some technology, like a totally independent style way. I was able to recreate the scene in Days of Heaven where the field is on fire and there's like all this smoke and everything, and we were able to not go through a VAD department. We used stock footage from Pond 5, like 4K stock footage. We rented grasses, that was about it, and we used the screen as our key light and dressed our talent, and we're able to recreate those shots. So when you listen to how the director did that in their making of, that was months of planning and gasoline and fumes and safety people and like 2 weeks of night shooting and all of this stuff. But we were able to get some of the broad strokes of that concept in about half a day. So
very cool.
They're just these really interesting ways that will surprise you.
Well, let me refine the question then almost to like a second stage, like who, so not just what projects are benefiting the most, but who is benefiting the most at this stage? Is it the studio? Is it the filmmakers? Is it the VFX vendors? Yeah, I'd love to hear about that too.
I was waiting for Cindy.
Yeah.
I would say from my perspective, I don't have a clear sense of who's benefiting yet, because the economics of the real-time 3D business are shady at best. And I think that the politics of techniques can quite often trump the truth of how to do it. Like what Catherine just described to me excites me. And having come from Alberta where they shot Days of Heaven, thank God they didn't have to burn some more of my province to get some beautiful golden hour stuff. But like, it makes me think that is a great example. How you get a filmmaker to that decision, how you get studios to that decision is a brilliant move. Now, what happens on the bigger budget films is although that scene might have been the best way to do that, there can be vendors that have such a heavy back end that they'll say, oh, I have 1,200 roto artists. You don't have to do it that way. Just shoot it on green screen. Why do you want, you've got a big green screen psych. Why do you want to have 14 people on stage when you don't need 14 people on stage? You can just shoot it the way you're used to. And that's scary to me because, I shot a virtual film this fall, and I deliberately did it on a really small green screen psych, but I had an engine connected to a MOSIS tracker, so myself and the talent could see our environment. And it was not finished environment, I add, because I was like, I'm not going to try and get it pixel perfect.
Real time.
I'll just get geo, so they understand where they are, and the DP knew where to light, and that was good for me because I was an independent filmmaker in that sense. So I think that what Catherine describes is amazing. If we can get that to happen at the tentpole level, that's amazing. But even more so is if VFX vendors can kind of start to figure that out, they will save some money. If they can sell that to the studios and to the filmmakers, then they will actually solve some of their overhead problems. And independent filmmakers will solve some of their budget problems.
Yeah.
But there's a lot of politics in these big films that kind of trump the logic of production.
Yeah, definitely. I feel like that's where the role of virtual production supervisor is super new and it's kind of becoming itself. It's very interesting. The same way that like an overall production aside, visual effects supervisor helps manage those vendor relationships and bid work with their producer. that's kind of what's developing right now, is this virtual production supervisor role that's like working directly with the visual effects, producer and DP. And that's where from like these larger budgets that you're describing, it is very interesting because there are conversations depending on the scope of work about where the budget falls. Is it something that's going to be its own department? And then a lot of what I do is help bring pitches for how real-time is integrated into each department so that those funds are transferred evenly through departments, and then identify what costs a virtual production department would manage and what crew and decisions that they would manage. But then there's always this sort of sharing of resources. And that's a conversation that is still fluid. And I think it's fluid with every production right now. So I'm glad that you're pointing that out. But I feel like I wanted to just balance it with, because of some of those fears, like having somebody in that role, production side can actually help protect the vendors too. And I think having virtual production supervisors who are coming out of visual effects supervision on some level, who have experience working with all of these vendors, really helps. And that's where some of my relationships that I built as a coordinator and visual effects production manager over the years have helped, because even if I come in as a side player or at a different time in the project, I still know Scanline, I still know WETA, I still know these companies.
Yeah.
So I know how they work.
Yeah, kind of a sidebar, but an interesting learning that I had at the beginning of COVID was there's always that song and dance when you're at the pre-production bidding stage, where you're kind of also trying to associate how many days do you need our team on set for. And that was kind of always a funny one for me, because we want to be there, to make sure that, one, we're connecting with all the right creatives, so that when we get down to the creative process later, I feel like I've fully looked in your eyes and captured your vision, and we can carry that along. But also just to make sure things are technically shot right, we've got everything we need. And there was always that funny kind of like, well, let's just assume 3 days here or whatever. But COVID kind of helped with forcing that conversation to change. And I noticed that we said, we're just coming for the whole thing. We have to, because we're not going to be able to get someone tested the day of on a 911 anyways. And we're not going to be able to do these things. So it kind of opened the door to just kind of allowing us to be there more, and being okay with that. Just logistically, we had to. And so, yeah, hopefully that's kind of part of the transformation we're seeing, is that there's more autonomy at the front end. Yeah, and I wonder what that means for the back end. And Paul, you had talked about overheads and studio carrying these, huge amount of people to be able to fix and pivot at the end. I just wonder about the artists, and I wonder how is this a tool that used internally will benefit people, from quick real-time rendering,
Yeah.
or does it actually open the door to more iteration because we're able to see more. So I don't know, like Cindy, maybe I'll throw it to you to start first. How are you guys utilizing real-time rendering, and have you seen this being something that benefits it? Yeah,
I think just to make it on a positive note, I think the best thing with all these conversations about virtual production is that the one thing I've definitely realized is that I'm seeing artists, supervisors, leads that's been in the industry for many years really step out of their comfort zone, right? I think in the last before just right before virtual production, I think visual effects as a whole has kind of started to get into a cycle, which is comfortable. People know how to do things. The tools are mostly standard in most of the in the vendors studios, and I think people are getting used to, okay, I'm going to do this, I'm going to do that. Next thing I'm going to render in this, can comp, done. I think that eventually put a lot of people in that, okay, I'm just going to rinse and repeat. With virtual production, I think it gave a lot of people that jerk to be like, oh, this is something new. I need to kind of up my game is a way of saying it, or just really excited about, oh, there's something new to be actually doing. I'm not gonna, this is not a job. After a while, the passion dies out, it becomes a job, and it really kind of lit up that passion in a lot of people that I'm seeing. It's like,
Right.
oh, I've done this for 20 years, and now there's this new thing that I can like dive into. I think that is super, super important, especially, from a vendor side. Well, we're constantly talking about how to make sure that our team is motivated. And I think coming from a overall very passionate industry, that motivation is also important. And I think that for me is 100% a positive thing, that you can just really see who are the ones that are like, you know what, I don't know anything about Unreal or Unity, but I'm gonna spend my weekend just learning. I don't always need to go through this 20-40 hour course. I'm just gonna open it up and learn it on my own. And seeing artist supervisors with 20-30 years of experience kind of getting excited again and doing that, I think that's the most encouraging from a people manager point of view. I think that's one positive note that I definitely want to bring up, because that's so important when we're always delivering. We know there are long hours in this industry, and I think that just kind of lit a fire with a lot of people that I see.
Yeah, she's 100% on point with that. Is that just the ability to generate atmospherics like with a click of a button is pretty crazy. And that is the right side of it. And I think that is the beauty of it. And to be honest, if I was myself, with 10 years less, I'd be excited to start a VFX company right now, because I would build it on the spine of real-time 3D.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas like a lot of the big vendors, they have these legacy pipelines that whether they better figure out how to get real-time 3D implemented, because they can solve some of their time crunch, render farm crunches, all these problems can be solved. But if you were a young guy, young girl that's starting up your own company with a couple friends, you could be doing some kick-ass work and not having to go into this idea of having huge bodies of artists. Now, the thing is the business, as Cindy was alluding to right before real time came on, was really getting rinse and repeat, and it was really getting nasty competitive. Still is, but to a certain degree there was not enough work because of the way the politics were working and the way the looks were looking, as I've talked about before. If you look at films 2 years ago, every wave looks the same, and that's weird. Okay, Cindy's company really defined how you do waves in CG. I've worked with them many times, and now everyone does waves in CG. So you got to keep going.
Yeah.
And this business is not about I've got the wave button. This business is about we do waves better than anyone else, or we do explosions better than anyone else. So real time is going to create that new competition as people get into it and as vendors get into it, and those old hands that are excited by that interactivity will push things further, I believe. So there is both a good and a bad to it, as there always has been with filmmaking. Filmmaking is technology, so it's sort of part of the trend. So I think that we shouldn't think that it's all good or all bad. We should just sort of understand it's a double-edged sword.
Yeah, well, and something that's also kind of interesting too about what real time does for visual effects, like from like a younger generation perspective, is that it gives directors and DPs and people on the production side this kind of window into visual effects. Even if they don't understand the history of where all of these things came from, they kind of get a sampling of what it is, or they get to jump right in where they get to kind of physically move their body in a motion capture suit and create animation keyframes. Like I think anybody coming from production can like understand the concept of sequencer and how it sort of blows your mind about editing. Like from a cinematographer's point of view, that idea that you could, once your world is built, have action that you capture with a director. You can almost, it's like a really cool way to work with a director, because they can focus on performance and you can focus on your shots, but you can actually sort of independently almost play around in the scene and come together in that scene. Just with, you can reshoot something at a camera angle that's on your editing timeline already. That's what I'm trying to say. But some of these just like higher, these cerebral kind of concepts about filmmaking, how you construct a project, like that's something that I see the game engine doing. It's gonna like also create like interesting new anomalies that we see trickle into traditional visual effects, because it means that like you can iterate more ideas about how you would execute something instead of somebody having to work their way up through a directing career, you know, for 30 years and then discover it and then kind of have to learn on the job. There's just going to be, I think, more ideas from that front end of the pipeline coming down too.
Yeah, and I like this idea of like maybe artists becoming, I don't want to project too much, but more generalist again, because when I started, I very much was a generalist and I would do all of it poorly, but I had to then go and focus on compositing. But do you, like, you know, Paul, with that example you were talking about with like a nimble small team, not needing to have all these overheads and this kind of linear production pipeline, do you feel that there are, or it's almost like, is there a need, or is it worthwhile like becoming a more of a generalist artist? And do you think studios
Absolutely.
will adapt to that and have generalist kind of
Yeah, I think what's happened in visual effects is that things became like a dangerous conversation I found myself in was someone on the studio side was talking about how a visual effect was almost like a Chinese menu, and you could just, oh, I want to have an explosion and I want to have a magic wand, and that should just cost this much. And I was like, oh my God, that's actually why I have, you know, gotten into real-time 3D myself, and that's why I've actually left my job, is that because I'm like, no, this is garbage. None of the visual effects artists in a pipeline get into visual effects because they want to be part of an assembly line.
right?
They get into visual effects because they want to be part of that magic that we see on the screen. And I think a lot of us still like to go to theaters when it's safe, you know, so that idea that we're going to all sit down for 2 hours and watch a movie, or we're going to sit down for an hour on a couch and watch a TV show. Those of us that have worked on things, and I'm like you, Chris, I was a very terrible generalist. You know, I just learned blur and glow. That's how you make everything look good. Maybe a little grain. Was that ultimately I was part of something that was going to be suspend, you know, you're going to sit there and you're going to watch it and be entertained.
Right.
And for someone who handles the money to tell me that, well, it's just basically a recipe like that I can just bang off, that was antithetical to everything I love about film and entertainment. So real time does create that world where someone can walk in and not be great at all of it, but can put together a scene. Like as Catherine was pointing out, you could actually do some mocap, get it into an engine, light it, and then get a virtual camera and actually shoot it as though you had arranged a gargoyle to fly over you. You could never do that before. And if you're generally handy with any of these tools, you can do that. You don't have to be an expert. Now, when we get to the big tentpole productions, we are going to have to be specialists. And really one of the enemies to virtual production right now is that there's just not enough people that can actually do that virtual production technical work. And it's a lot of scripting, a lot of programming. And so there's a lot of opportunity for young, you know, technical artists out there right now to really dive in and get your hands on this stuff. This is actually how you will rocket your career, is that, you know, if you're studying Maya right now, then you are going to end up in a pipeline. But if you're studying computer science and programming, and you start looking at some of these real-time engines, you are going to get yourself in the hot seat very fast. So if you're doing it, I suggest you keep going. If you're a young filmmaker who isn't technical, I think you should make friends with these fellows and, you know, learn how they're doing it, because together you guys are going to create something special. And then I think if you're a legacy filmmaker, you should be willing to go out on a limb and try some new things with these new technologies when you can, because you know, the vendors will respond to what is demanded of them. as long as it's not, you know, something that's going to burn them down. So I think that there's the whole industry is going to slowly and surely change its ways, and those who don't want to change may win today, but in a couple of years you'll see that they'll start to fall behind because their looks will not be fresh. They won't do something that's interesting. And you know, I when I came into the business, the VFX business hadn't really settled down yet, other than, you know, the usual suspects were the big ones that we all know, the legacy guys. But there's a lot of vendors that had cool ideas, and the only ones that are still around are the ones that wanted to make cool things. So like Cindy's boss, the owner, I remember working with him and I was like, this is going to be really expensive, because we figured out how to make Alembic go into conversion so that we didn't have to do rotoscope, which is ridiculous. You know, like all conversion was about rotoscope, but we figured out how to use Alembic, and I said, that's going to be expensive. And he said, yeah, but it'll look cool. And that was something that I took away and realized, yeah, this is why I like this business, is there are still people in the business that want to make it look cool, and then we'll figure out the economy of it. And I did. So that's where people like that that are using these tools are going to do really well. So if you keep that spirit, then I think that the business stays fresh.
Yeah, I'd love to apply that also to artist careers too, and talk about that, because we talked about the homogenization of output and what that meant from, you know, I totally agree with you, Paul. You would go, oh, this company does this the best, this does this the best. And that was kind of also, again, just to flip it more to an artist and a capacity perspective, that was a draw. Like you wanted to go work somewhere so you could learn about that thing, or you could pursue that. But I do agree that kind of everyone is kind of up that game, and or people have moved around, and again, this maybe potential rinse and repeat. And I wonder, do you guys think, you know, you just mapped out a roadmap for people that could be very successful for them, and I wonder, is this the spark that will help studios attract people in that the crazy labor shortage that we have right now? Is it virtual production and real-time rendering something that if companies were to, you know, put at the forefront, is that kind of an edge to build people, or are there just not enough people doing it yet to kind of, are we kind of too much of the infancy there, I guess?
I think maybe not to put a pin into whether it's virtual production or it's real time or it's whatsoever, right? But more of having that space where people can have the opportunity to still be innovative. So it can be anything, because again, you know, sometimes we talk about virtual production, and before we know it, we end up talking about the one thing that everybody knows about, which is like LED stage. And I think all of us know here, it's virtual production is a suite of many, many, many different tools. So I think it's more about like really be able to provide that environment where people can still be innovative, because we know that the thing that they are doing right now could potentially in the next few years be a machine learning task, an AI task. And how can people still continue to be very much part of this industry is to be creative, be innovative, and let the artists do the creative work while the machines do the rinse and repeat part of the process, right? We all know that there's always part of the process, part of the pipeline that is rinse and repeat, but that could potentially be something that we replace with machines, but the artist can still be there doing the creative, innovative part, which is not something that you can script to be creative. Maybe in the next 20 years, I don't know, but
no, I think you're right.
I see right now.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think there's a human side that has nothing to do with technology, but it's very much what Cindy's talking about, and it's exactly what Catherine did with her Days of Heaven scene, is using creativity to try out some new things, and companies should be really encouraging their artists to do things on the side. You know, like I've seen, you know, my old company had photo contests for their artists that took pictures and they would display it. That was great. They should be allowed to go play with the camera. If they have a camera, if you're in a big vendor, you have a camera department, those cameras should be rentable for the staff to go out and shoot stuff. And I actually had a friend who was a cameraman on The Hobbit, and he would go out on the weekend and they were shooting their own little pitch videos and stuff like that. Like, I think that if you're going to work at a very big company, then those big companies need to like make sure that artists don't feel like, you know, another brick in the wall. And then if you're working at a small company, I think Chris, you've been there. It's like when you're in a small company, all that creativity funnels in because you tend to be generalists and you tend to like expand your skill set. The good news is for anyone that's trying to get into VFX nowadays, there's a lot of room for you to join. Like, please do not feel like the doors are closed. I remember when I wanted to get in, I actually had to sneak into a facility with my buddy. He ran his scan card and then I jumped over the kiosk because I wanted to go look at a match move layout, which like now would never be done in a facility in North America. That would be off-sited, and then you just approve it in-house, or you just let AI do it. But I think that excitement that I had at the time was because nobody was getting into visual effects. It was a very tough business to get into. And nowadays it's a business that if you can learn software quickly, it doesn't matter if you don't know the software that the company you're trying to get into uses. It's that you know how to learn, you know, and that involves creativity. And if you're brave enough to do what Catherine has done, which is go independent, then you better be a creative person that can pick tools up fast, because there is a space, there is a very good business for those jobs too. It's just that be careful, you know, like it's a tough thing. I think ultimately we are in a bit of a golden age for content creation. I think that's, you know, very much because two things happened as COVID happened, and then the streamers all showed up. So suddenly there's way too much content to be made. And
Paul, just to jump in there, do you think that demand is here to stay, or do you think that it's a bit of a backlog? Do you think that it's going to normalize, or this is kind of the new normal of how much content is being created?
I think it'll maybe like slow itself down by maybe 20%, but I would be surprised if it's any more than that. I think we're at a new high level of content production volume, and that's cool because like you know, it allows for more hands to get on deck, and I think that that's great because in all earnesty, there's a lot of old people in VFX that are going to leave. They will exit, and that's going to open up new opportunities. Like VFX soups, there's not that many in the world. If you're a VFX soup right now, your status just goes higher and higher because there's just not enough out there. Because if you think every IP needs a VFX soup, there's not enough. You know, it's a problem I was running into all the time. Which means that if you're a comp soup, you're already moving up and stuff like that. So real time only just creates more jobs that we don't have people for. And I think that, you know, ultimately speaking, it's a great time to be in the business. It's not as lucrative as it used to be. It's going to be a little bit more ground down, but that's okay. I don't think we got into the business really to be like, for it to be like super lucrative. It's more about having a lifestyle that you can enjoy.
Yeah, that's great. And I mean, there's just so many questions that come to mind about how do we keep up with the demand? And I'd love to even talk more about, has the technology, this kind of insurgence of new technology been because of the need to keep up with the demand, or is it just kind of in parallel? And again, just to put you on the spot again, Cindy, like you're talking about being innovative. Do you think that, has there been new initiatives that you've seen based on the demand for all this work, and even the shortage of talent, to say we need to shift and focus on innovative technology?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I don't think anybody really has a choice to begin with. I think, you know, like unless you're like, okay, you know, we're gonna ramp up in the next few years, you have to be in it, right? And it's about how I do think that at the end of the day, it takes two hands to clap. It is, you know, vendors, studios providing the environment, you know, training into these real-time technology, making sure that the artists have the machines that can, you know, deal with real time and things like that. That needs to happen, and I do see it happening, not just at Scanline, at multiple other VFX studios as well, all across. And then on the artist side, there needs to be that willingness to be open-minded and like I want to do this new thing. It's probably going to be difficult. I need to do what I need to do right now and deliver the work, because we know there's a lot of demand, there's a lot of work to be done, but at the same time, also be learning something else, because we also know how much it does cost to invest on training, and that's a lot of time. So it does take two hands to clap, in my opinion, that on both sides, there needs to be that openness and willingness to know that we are in this phase. And if we do not use this opportunity, like I said, this golden era to really take that leap, what we would realize is that the train will keep going and we'll be left at the station. So do you want to be on the train, or do you want to be left at station? I think it's up to individual as well as the vendors to decide. I do think that that's a very for the lack of a better word, harsh reality, but a very true thing.
Yeah. And again, I don't want to focus on it too much, but I think it'd be worth touching on how is working from home and working remote affected this. And Catherine, I'd love to hear from you too, on just even in the direct production side, where sometimes you just want to be in the room drawing with somebody, and I'd love to hear how that's worked. But Cindy, keeping with you as well, has that hurt you guys? Or because I know Scanline has made a big effort to go remote, and I think that's unique.
I think we're quite lucky. Yeah, I think we're quite lucky because that was something already that we started doing before COVID. So for us, it was more of a logistic, procedure than trying to figure out what technology are we use, how are we going to have artists locked in remotely and things like that. But I do remember that 1 week was probably the most stressful week of my life, trying to figure out where are we, how do we get everybody, home, who to prioritize first, how, because it is a situation where everyone was like, can I work from home? Can I work from home? And it was a stressful week to get everybody back in at home. And really, it did take us several weeks to settle down and make sure that everyone's comfortable with their setup. But thankfully, at that point in time, I think everybody really also understood that we all have to be on the same page and do this together. So the artists as well were all really willing to try anything, and be part of the process, really be so helpful. So I do think that we got past the hump of being able to, produce just like we would and deliver without, any misdeliveries and things like that. So, and I do think that this is something that a lot of people are seeing the benefit, that is not a problem, but will be able to help us, give more flexible hours, especially for, new mothers, for example. I've got a lot of this kind of cases where new mothers can now also be, working, while dealing with childcare. So I do think that, it is something to stay, but it is how we figure out a hybrid structure where we would be able to, get best of both worlds, I think.
Right. And Catherine, how has working from home affected you, being so tied to the production side?
Sure. Well, it's amazing how much you can actually do through Zoom and these platforms. And yeah, I feel like I'm trying to zero in on specific examples in my head. But for example, like if you're trying to do, let's say, like bad work and any of like the early art direction for a larger virtual production film that's on LED walls, like, or, visualization kind of, that's relatively simple to do, I think, through these platforms, because you can do multiplayer sessions. It gets trickier, and this is what I was thinking of, when you start incorporating the director of the film or the show into that process. So, there's the same way you would like maybe mail somebody a camera kit to get them set up. You were probably bringing over a VR headset and a computer to like get them synced up and set up in the world, so that they can be on Zoom and reviewing content. I think it's something that's tricky with any workflow, like how to make sure the director's seeing something accurately, how to make sure everyone's on the same page. And that'll be a little bit custom for every project. But there's been some really interesting ways that I've been able to work with that like bring visual effects teams into the process, just through needing to work on Zoom so much through COVID, it meant that we were all sort of already set up with a way. I can actually, this is funny, it was with Scanline, with Eyeline Studios, actually, we were able to set up a completely virtual view of the stage we were working on.
Yeah.
So for some things, we just didn't need to verify color necessarily. We just had to make sure that the scene files were opening. And it was sort of a surprise in the workflow, like a good surprise for the other vendors, because we had about 5 vendors working on delivering content to that one wall. And it was just nice to be able to schedule Zoom meetings after a day on set so that I could walk through how scenes were loading with those other VFX supervisors, with our Eyeline stage team, and make sure that, you know, everything was looking okay, because it was just a countdown at that point. We knew we had 3 days with everyone in person, but we needed much more time on the front end with their developing team so that they could, you know, check something in person if they needed to. So I'd say that having these new virtual ways of communicating early in the process kind of helps you organize like your teamwork and like how people work together in a more meaningful way. And that was great, because by the time we got to set, it wasn't like, you know, chickens with heads cut off. It was like everyone kind of knew what to expect, and they already knew what they were trying to solve. And so we could zero in on what needed to be addressed and prepped for the shoot and just kind of go from there. So that's an example of like a cool success story.
Yeah, that's great. Well, I feel like there's still so many things I want to talk about, but we're kind of coming to our time. And I think if we kind of frame the next 10 or so minutes on final predictions and trends, you know, what that could be, what do you think the next, you know, 5 years looks like, or even just what's something you're focusing on over the next year. And if you could fold in, you know, is there anything in this that's lagging? You know, first thing I think about is what's the playbook, and how do you associate time and budget this stuff at the various stages that it's working on. But yeah, if we could all just take a second to go through and make your final predictions and what's lagging behind and what's to come, I think that'd be really insightful for everybody. Whoever would like to speak first, feel free to jump in.
I mean, for me, there's a couple things. First of all, I want IP creation to not die, because right now the people that are greenlighting budgets are very conservative, and they just want to highlight, they just want a repeat of a repeat of a repeat. You know, like, I mean, I love all the old IPs. I mean, I'm a Star Wars guy. I love superheroes, but if you study the history of cinema, Westerns died because they just became so common. You know, it's in Barton Fink. It's like, are you making a wrestling movie or are you making a Western? You know, like, it's like, we have to get past this idea that there's only certain things that sell. So hopefully real-time 3D allows, you know, really original ideas to get visualized, to be sold to people at studios and content, you know, generate like IPs like Apple TVs and Amazons, etc., where they see like, oh, you know, this is a new idea. This is not something that has a book about it, that has a follower. You know, I don't want to see Instagram influencers become movies. I want to see new ideas, new stories. So I hope that happens, because in some ways, cinema will become almost like a museum art if it doesn't innovate, you know. And the same point goes is I don't want to see cinemas go away. You know, like the Zoomification of the world has made everybody, and you know, you can buy these huge, beautiful TVs so cheap that like people start thinking they don't need to go to the theater. And for me, that's very scary, because I love the cinematic experience. You know, I really don't want that to go away. And that comes hand in hand with what kind of content we're creating. So I think IP creation is really something that is very important to me. And I want to make sure that I can contribute to the cinematic experience by innovating on some of the processes. So what I'm charging out to do now is I want to rationalize the virtual production film pipeline. Like, I want to make sure that that VFX artists aren't getting more pressure, that they're getting less pressure. I want to make sure that filmmakers make decisions that don't bind them in a corner, but don't put pressure on the poor guy that has to do the final pixel, that he suddenly is like, doesn't get to see his family because the filmmaker was driving down the 405 and changed his mind. Like that, like, real time is supposed to allow us to make mistakes and not suffer so badly. So nobody along that value chain should be suffering. The technology should be iterative in a way that allows all of us to win, and not like somebody get the receiving end of the stick. And I don't want filmmakers to feel locked into things, but if you actually look at the history of cinema, happy mistakes and all that other stuff, sometimes they have to be locked into decisions. So if LED filmmaking gets to the point where the virtual art department is final sign off on assets, then that's good for filmmakers. That will actually make them a bit more disciplined in focusing on what they want. So we have to be careful that we don't forget the lessons of the past as we drive into the brave new future. And other than that, I'm pretty hopeful about the future of content production as long as cinemas don't close. I think that we need to be really careful about that.
Very cool. It's exciting and transformative. I love it.
As for myself, I think the focus will really be on how to scale the workforce in a way that is not just about adding headcount, but really allowing people to do more meaningful work in a shorter period of time to, continue managing this higher demand, and really allow people to innovate and focus on education. Because I think the word virtual production has been used and misused a lot, and how we can, allow more people to know what it is about and be using all the suite of different technologies within the virtual production umbrella as tools in their toolbox, and not just, a toy that, we definitely have to use that. So I think, definitely my focus is on that, and, definitely super positive about how this could really help. We are right now in the epicenter of innovating, and I believe we can come out this with a, like what Christy said, a playbook that, at least would create a sandbox for us to work within and be less terrifying for some people. Yeah.
Awesome.
And for the future, I'm definitely personally working on being a support system for creatives in that core team, directors, VFX supervisors, DPs, production designers, those core teams that need that support, putting together what a timeline is, like what workflows could be, and figuring out whether it's a custom team that we need to, build and create our own department, or, with the way that vendors are sort of coming together and banding together now in the last year or so, what teams can we build to help make that project, and, how to not only work those relationships evenly through different departments, but also help define like what virtual production means for their project. So hopefully I can help play that role, on the studio level. And then what's something I'm excited about is just for my own personal creativity and artistry, there's so many different ways to use these tools and apply these tools to tell stories differently. And I said it before and I'll say it again, if you want to do different, you've got to do it differently. And these tools allow you to like really think about your process as an artist, and the order of how you do certain steps, the types of tools that you can use to create certain looks. It's very interesting. And I'm not just thinking about LED walls, I'm thinking about motion capture and new ways of incorporating animation into a live action project, or you know, visualize as it from a DP's perspective, you know, all these accessible tools that allow you to work with the DPs. So something like in that regard that I'm excited about are like the relationships of these creatives on film projects through tools like these, and having, you know, equal visibility of a visual effects supervisor next to a DP as the co-author of a shot. And, you know, maybe the future view that like a virtual production supervisor could be part of that mix as well.
That sounds amazing, and I would love that too. That sounds great. Well, thank you so much for all of your time and your insights, and hopefully everyone that's been watching today has learned a lot and been inspired to think of new concepts and be open to learning. So thanks again for having us, and hopefully you enjoy Spark. Thanks.
So welcome everyone, sorry for the delay. We're joined by a very, very busy group of people, which actually has turned out that I unfortunately only, well, lucky for us, Paul is able to join us today, but unfortunately Chris, Cindy and Catherine unfortunately are too busy to join us. So hey Paul, how's it going? Welcome back.
Good. Hey Zoe, nice to see you.
Awesome. So I'm Zoe and I'm going to be moderating the session. For anyone that has joined, please pop any Q&As that you have for Paul or I in the Q&A box. We'll answer as many as we can get through in the next 15 to 20 minutes. I hope you had a chance to see the session on the future of VFX. Is there magic or are there monsters lurking around the corner? We recorded our session a couple of weeks ago and it was a really great chat. So I hope lots of you have been able to see it so far. And for those that haven't, please check it out on the Inventive website, SparkFX website. It was an awesome session. So I've got a question first for Paul, which is, after the session, did you kind of have any like immediate thoughts or any kind of takeaways that you kind of left thinking about after the session with Cindy and Catherine and Chris?
You know, it's funny. I've been probably kicking those ideas around for a while, so I was probably more like, it was good to know I wasn't crazy, because I think some of my suspicions were being shared, and then I think there's some good sort of new ideas about really the virtual production of it all is something that is very hot, you know, obviously in my mind right now, because I'm diving into it now. And yeah, I have a lot of questions about where it's going to land. You know, I think what it is right now and where it's going to land is not the same thing. And I do feel like it's a very strange technology, because most of the younger folks in the crowd probably get it more than us older veteran types, but the barriers to the younger folks getting their hands on those LED volumes is pretty high. So I visited a stage last week that's like bigger than the Mandalorian stage, but the cost is very high. So I thought, okay, so if I cut back to when I was like a dumb kid with 26 years under my belt and a credit card bill that got my camera and my computer, I could get into that trouble. Whereas like you can't get into this type of LED trouble. And in a way, it's the younger crowd that we need to get on those tools to kind of crack some new formulas. So I'm kind of vexed with the idea of how to make that access happen. I think some of it's going to be through the fact that real-time tools are not expensive to learn. It's just more like a time context, but we're going to have to find a way to get young filmmakers on these LED volumes sooner than later.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And actually there's been a question that's come up in the chat, which is, how do younger folk who might have the knowledge but not the experience get past the gatekeepers?
I think the big thing is, I think the big thing with that is, the great thing about the engines is you can create a movie all in engine and showcase your abilities, and like I've seen some really amazing stuff that's been done just all in engine. And I think we all know that when you're independent and a younger person and you're doing that, you don't need to make it perfect. You just need to make it great, you know, because no movies are perfect. And in fact, a perfect movie is usually not that good. It's almost like synthetic food, you know, it's missing something. So I think that you should use the free tools as much as possible. And I think that you should not really give up. I think that, you know, just because you make a movie doesn't mean you're gonna, like when I made my student film, I thought that just accomplishing that was a ticket in, and it's not. But I learned a lot, you know, and I think that you have to kind of treat it that way. But the flip side is there's a lot of grants and scholarships out there to chase. And if you've made something, the best advice is make something else. Just keep making things, because don't get stuck on, well, I made this one film and it took me 8 years and now I gotta like live and die by it, because who you were when you started that film and who you are when you finish that film are very different. And the same thing is when you do your VFX portfolio, you know, like shots that you make, you're going to learn a lot. And by the end of the time you finish that big shot, you'll approach it differently the next time. So it's better to keep going than to think that you have one shot at it, if that makes any sense.
Yeah. And would you have any advice for anyone that's sort of keep getting those knockbacks? Like they've got, you know, they've got the knowledge and the want and the will, and they really are following all the advice that you give, but just really not getting any kind of doors opened. Would you have any advice that?
Yeah, find a mentor. You can always shoot me an email. I always have opinions, but you will get in if you keep at it. And if you keep knocking against walls, maybe you need to seek out a peer group. Like maybe you're a brilliant DP, but you can't organize to save your life. So maybe you need to find a producer in utero. You can't do this by yourself. Like this is not film, no matter what anyone tells you, is not a one-person show. If you try to do a one-person show, the chances of you missing angles that others could have brought to it are so high that you're actually making it harder for you to succeed. So always be willing to bring in your peer group, people that can help, and then also look for mentors. I've always been very lucky in the sense that I have no qualms about asking questions to those in charge and being like, hey, you know, can you spare 5 minutes? Because when you say to someone, can you spare 5 minutes? They'll give you half an hour. If you say to them, can I have an hour or can I buy you lunch? They will give you 15 minutes. So learn to like bust the door in, you know, make a little crack in there and then force your way in. And if you're an earnest person, nobody in the film business that is like a true collaborator is going to shut the door completely on you. They might give you an hour and then, you know, you should go away and come back after you've done 20 hours of research, but don't be afraid to ask for help, you know.
Awesome. Well, I think that's really excellent advice. Moving on to another question we've got from the chat is, how is this
Democratization.
Thank you, of tech influencing adoption rates and how they apply to projects, regardless of whether a veteran or a new person to the industry?
So I think if you're newer to the business, then your adoption rate is higher. But I think that there are a lot of senior VFX folks who have been frustrated for years with pipelines that can go into, you know, Unreal or Unity or Omniverse or any other real-time engine that pops up here and there, and they're already starting to do things. And so I think that the adoption rate is quite high across the board for those who have the desire and or bravery to go in and want to create an actual narrative piece or a shot. You know, some people get really deep into their departments and just want to be like, oh, I'm just a comper or I'm just a CG guy. And you'll see that those people are the ones that tend to go into the industry, into the pipelines that exist. But filmmakers are going to be the ones that like, and I don't mean to say that you're not a filmmaker, but like filmmakers are people that want to create a piece that's complete with sound and color and animation. And so they're probably going to dive in and try and create an output that is more of a piece than a shot. And so I've seen a lot of, I've seen senior design people that know how to use CG that have created a 5-minute pitch piece that got them funding for their feature. I've seen VFX soups that have been off the box for 10 or 15 years that are getting into the tools and creating stuff. But I've also seen younger folk getting on the engines and creating more engaging work. So I'd say that everyone in some way, shape, or form is engaging with the tools. It's just it's what you're doing with the tools that is going to differentiate you from everyone else.
There's an interesting question that's come up as well in the chat, which is, does it make sense if game engines launch lighter versions of their tools, which are meant solely for VFX and live action, where the game tools fat has been cut out and we're left with a more streamlined package?
That person should write me, because that's what I'm doing right now.
Interesting.
Yeah.
And why do you think that's needed? Like
because I can't use, like when I dive into the engines, I'm like, oh my God, there's too much. Like I want a simple stripped down. If I'm doing like previs or layout, I don't need like all the programmability of an engine.
Yeah.
And what I want is tools that are designed with those tasks in mind. So that's what I'm actually doing right now. Like I'm working on builds that are, you know, a year and a half ahead of what the product is.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm just having GUIs built on top of the engines.
Yeah.
That are stripped down. Like I want my cameras and some lights, and I want some rigs. That's all I want from one version. I want to manipulate my environment where I'm moving buildings and again moving lights and texturing. That's it. You know, I don't want everything. So whoever asked that question knows what's going on, and you should probably contact me. We can get you in touch with me.
Yeah, and then relating that to, you know, our title of the talk, what do you think effect that's, you know, those lighter versions of the tools are going to do for the future of the industry?
Well, I think it gives those, it takes away the barriers for those who are just getting in.
Mm-hmm.
I think for those of us that have been in the industry for a long time, it's helpful, but there's another conversation on that more technical side that's about folding this technology into existing pipelines to speed up every step. You know, so it's not necessarily about replacing pipelines, but looking for opportunities to cut down on time. And so when you can apply like a real-time technology to iteration space, or to, you know, a comper that wants to integrate CG into his 2.5D comp, is there a way that he can be previewing that faster but still working in his traditional, you know, DCC tool like Nuke? And the answer is yes, but it's complicated. It's not something where you just buy a license of a real-time engine and connect it to Nuke. It requires development and support. So another angle that I'm really focused on is getting computer devs into facilities, because as you know, Zoe, we never have enough computer devs. You know, like getting them into VFX is very difficult. So I'm coming at it a different way, and coming from a programming perspective with a filmmaker's eye for fixing problems. We'll see if it works.
No, interesting. And then kind of obviously, you know, we've talked a lot, and the session talks a lot about real-time technology influencing the future VFX. Do you think there's anything else that's going to be just as significant or influential? You know, maybe not to the same level, but still pretty influential to sort of shape the direction that the industry heads in.
Well, I think, you know, we've been through this wave where, like, first it was you had to be a very high level functioning technocrat to do visual effects work, you know, and then we saw the roto prep match move phase of VFX being taken offshore into lower cost centers, and that affecting the way people that worked in visual effects even conceived of what their job was. So the work became assembly line, you know, and to a certain degree that had some benefits, and then on another side of it, it has some negatives, which is all innovation. I think that the next step is how do we arm the small firm that is not ever going to scale up but wants to do good work? How do we get them able to create good looking work out of the box without having 1,000 people as a sort of outsource support facility? But the flip side is, how do we turn the outsource support facilities into higher flying artists? Because the volume of content required now from 2 years ago has gone up so dramatically that everywhere I look, there's not enough artists. So it's a really good time to be a VFX artist because there's never been this much work out there. So the question becomes, how do you get into the business and not get stuck in a department or get stuck in a certain tier because of where you are in the world? And I think that if the tools become smarter and more agile, in other words, you know, being able to light in real time and animate in real time, as I said, it might not be, you're not going to be like that, you know, tentpole VFX level of rendering quality, but you can certainly get far and then hand it over to someone who knows how to take that and turn it into that high level render. So interoperability is something I'm diving into really heavily right now. Like, how do I get this real time build into Nuke? How do I get it from Nuke at this facility to Nuke at the other facility? And obviously the arrival of USD is going to be where I think we use as our foundation for interoperability.
Mhm.
So my goal is that I'm creating an environment that doesn't force you to only use certain software and only be as, you know, like, I don't want to get into a holy war about what software you use. I want it to be about how are we getting the job done, because that's merit, you know. So I don't know if that answers the question. I'm probably like going on a diatribe by now.
No, it's all great. And yeah, we are in a sort of a golden age where there is, you know, an incredible amount of content out there. And definitely, you know, not enough time or people to do it. So I think it's important that we keep finding ways to make all this great content that everybody wants us to make.
Yeah.
Really.
And push it.
Yeah.
You know, we need to go beyond, oh, well, I know how to mimic what I saw. Because you watch it now, right? It's like when a tentpole film comes out very quickly on like and I won't say the companies, because it's not about criticizing the companies. I think it's a great initiative. You'll see tutorials on how to achieve those looks that you saw in the trailer, which is like, that's really fascinating and cool. But it's also kind of scary if you're a person who's defining those looks, because very quickly someone is turning around and templating it and turning it into something that's a little lesser than what you did, but a lot of people will say that's good. So I think we need filmmakers to keep pushing the boundaries so that pipelines constantly have to be innovated on. If we get stuck in a situation where pipelines become like, there was a time when I could say like, oh, I know who did that water, I know who did that fire. That was like a dangerous time where things were starting to look mono. And then we went through a revolution and changed, and like looks got better and better and shots got more dynamic. I actually kind of want to get back now to I'd like to see a filmmaker that holds shots for a long time, you know, shots that like I watched Miami Vice, the director's cut. It was like the remake with Colin Farrell and Jamie Foxx. And I was like, are people going to make movies like this ever again? Because it was like shot, I think it was shot with the Genesis. It was shot at night. It was very noisy, but there was a lot of VFX in it. You just didn't know. Like it was all folded into that noise and stuff. And it was like, it really felt like a documentary about cops going deep undercover, which I loved. But like the money to make that movie is not available anymore. You know, it's like, if you're not making a movie that's blockbuster superheroes, then you have to be making a movie that's like at a pretty low budget. And so that's a scary point for us to be, because it does create parameters that are not good for innovation. But
Yeah.
Good filmmakers work around budgets.
Yeah. Well, you've definitely got some people in the audience that agree with you there. I think we're going to have to wrap it because we're out of time.
All right.
But I want to thank you. I want to thank you, Paul, for giving up your time on a sunny afternoon in Vancouver. I know they're quite rare, so I appreciate you giving the time to us today for Spark. And yeah, I encourage people to watch the full session online, and then we've got also one last session coming up. So thanks everyone for coming to listen to us this afternoon.
Yeah, thank you, everyone. Good luck. Never give up.
Cheers, Paul. Bye-bye.
Cheers.